Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Parsha Shlach. And although the main part of the portion deals with the story of the spies, and a quite important and interesting story, I'd like to deal with the news of the day. And just a few minutes ago, in the United States, the Supreme Court overruled the Roe v. Wade opinion of 1973, which gave women the right to abortion. And the question of abortion in Jewish law is a complicated one, and it needs much discussion. It's not so black and white as is often thought. There are nuances in the halacha. But what I'd like to address is the question of, do we take our religious opinions or our religious laws and impose them on society at large? And when it comes to Roe v. Wade, there's two questions in the United States in particular. One is the question of the constitutionality of abortion rights or not, and that's somewhat of a technical issue. But then the question is, okay, whether the Constitution gives us the right to abortion or not, then we have the ability in the United States, it's by state, or even the federal government, and in Canada the same thing is true, to then either outlaw abortion or to allow it. And really the issue is it the correct thing or not to do? And the question really should surround not the issue of women's choice, although that's the way it's often depicted, at least on one side of the debate, but the question is, when does life begin? Does life begin at conception, as the church says? Does it only begin at birth? Does it begin at viability? And again, these are questions which are very interesting and actually debated to a degree, not exactly the way I said in Jewish law, but the question really is, this is not it's not a factual discussion. It's not a factual debate. It's, as many other people put it, it's a metaphysical debate. When does life begin? There's no simple answer to that. If the Torah gives us an answer, we will follow that answer. If our gut tells us one thing, maybe we should follow that. But at the end of the day, it's not something which is very easily determined. Just like the time of death is not easily determined. There's brain death, or do you wait for cessation of breathing, or do you wait for cessation of the heartbeat? These are questions which we could say that that's death, but what defines death is really very subjective, and therefore the same thing as the beginning of life. What defines life? When does life begin? So the question is, let's say we have an answer that we think is correct, based on the Torah, based on our religion, based on our sense of morality. Should we impose that on others? And my argument today, and again, this is my personal opinion, but is the opinion of many other people that I've heard, is that at least in the United States and Canada, and any government that has many different religions, we shouldn't impose one view on others. Simply put, if we think that life starts at conception and we impose that on other people, then what's going to happen when they impose their beliefs on us, which might be contrary to our religious beliefs? There's almost no end to it. So then you could always ask, murder in itself might be a decision based on our morality or based on our Torah law, right? What is considered murder? Is abortion murder? Is killing people in war murder? Is the execution of a murderer by the state considered murder? These are all questions which are not simply answered. On the one hand, you think, oh, it's very simple. Lo sirtzach, you shall not murder. And it's obvious, everyone holds like that. But it's not so simple. And the question that we have to ask is, okay, when we come to determination, should we therefore impose it on others? And I think the danger of imposing our religious beliefs or anyone's religious beliefs on other people is extremely dangerous. At a certain point, when it comes to, let's say, murder, and are you allowed to kill someone who comes to steal your wallet, we might have an overwhelming majority of people who have certain beliefs, whether those beliefs are based on religion or their own personal morality. I don't think it makes a difference. If there's an overwhelming majority, and what's considered an overwhelming majority is also open to debate, but let's say 90%, for argument's sake, believe something, then I believe that's not an imposition on everybody, although of course you're imposing on that 10% that disagrees, but society has a right to make that decision. But if it's not an overwhelming majority, like the debate in abortion in the beginning of life, I think it's very dangerous for one section of society or one part of the population or a court, which might be skewed in one way or the other, to impose their beliefs on other people. And this, by the way, has far-reaching implications even for Jews in Israel. Do we impose our belief of that which the Torah dictates in regard to the keeping of Shabbat, the keeping of kosher, fasting on Yom Kippur, having chametz in hospitals on Pesach? These are all issues which the state of Israel faces. And my personal belief, which not everyone will agree with, is that unless you have an overwhelming majority of people who are following these Torah laws, then imposing is not only perhaps something I don't think is right just because my gut tells me it's not right, but I think it has the opposite effect. You don't necessarily have people following the Torah laws because you impose it on them. They might to a certain degree, but all you're doing is causing many more tensions than is necessary, and it won't necessarily have the positive effect that you think it's having. So therefore, perhaps even in Israel, we shouldn't impose our laws. Now, you might argue from this week's portion, it says that somebody was Makoshesh Eitzim, he was chopping wood on Shabbos, and Moshe brought the question to God, and God said, stone him to death. We're obviously imposing our religious beliefs, the keeping of Shabbat, and the inability to chop wood on Shabbos on other people. Because if you go out on the street and you ask, is there anything wrong with chopping wood on Saturday? I think most people would say it's okay to chop wood on Saturday, but yet we're imposing our beliefs. I think here, though, the difference is that is the overwhelming majority. In other words, the people of Israel at this time have accepted upon themselves the word of God that they heard on Mount Sinai, and the word of God is coming through the prophecy of Moshe, and therefore it was appropriate. But whether that's appropriate in modern day Israel or in Canada or the United States, my argument would be that it's not. And again, I know this is not such a simple opinion. Many people would argue, and it is open for debate, but I think it's very important to understand that, especially from a Jewish point of view, when we hope and we have experienced and we're happy with the religious allowances that we have in our host countries, we have to be very careful that we shouldn't take what our beliefs are and impose them on other people. Again, this is something which calls for a much larger debate and has to be discussed. And of course, we're not deciding it by a simple YouTube video, but I think it's important to think about it in that regard. And hopefully, as we think about it and talk about it and debate about it in a mature way, without just getting very emotional, I think we'll come to a determination, again, whether it's in regard to abortion rights, whether it's a regard to gun rights, or whether it's regard to keeping Shabbat or kosher in Israel. I think we'll come to a solution which many more people would be happy with if we think about it and discuss it in a much more open fashion than sometimes is the case with a debate as it is at present. Good Shabbos.